Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very first episode of what we're calling the Creative Lounge. This is one of those things that I've had in my brain, the back of my brain. I mean, there's lots of things back there, but this has been rattling around for a while. The idea to have interesting conversations with photographers all over the world and just kind of share that with a larger audience. And a couple of years ago, Photorec TV, myself, I partnered with David and Allie, and we launched PEN, the Photo Enthusiast Network. And I've got both David and Allie on today. And David had this same idea a couple of weeks ago and says, hey, man, we're kind of stuck at home. We've got all these connections with fantastic photographers. Let's start having some cool conversations. And I was like, yes, that sounds great. So on today's show, I want to welcome Mike Tedesco, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave to give you a proper introduction and just say hi to you all. It's nice of you to join on this Thursday afternoon, evening, wherever you're watching from.
Yeah, and gosh, we got people from all over the country right now that I see coming on in. That's awesome. Welcome, Mike, and absolutely, we are thrilled to be doing this first creative lounge. And the idea, Allie and I and Toby, we sat and we were just not sat down together, but we were chatting. We can't sit down together right at the moment, but we were chatting, and that's virtually. We meet so many incredible people and photographers that are experts in their field, and we thought, there's these other shows that are going on. I mentioned in the ad, like kind of live from Daryl's house, and the Daryl Hall and Oates, or Hall and Oates, and they sit and they do music together, and they're like in a living room, and it's like you're hanging out with friends, and the photography community is really that kind of community of people for the most part. It's a good loving group of people that like to help each other out, and you can usually sit down. When we could all sit down together, we could sit down and have a few drinks and see, I got a drink in my hand, and sit and just talk shop and coffee, tea, and Allie, where's your wine? And there you go. And we could just chat, and you could start chatting for hours, and you just talk about all these wonderful things of photography. And the more I started thinking about it, I started thinking, man, I know people like Mike that are professional sports photographers. In 2 weeks, we have a really great friend of Allie and I. His name is Timothy Drury. He is the keyboard player right now for Don Felder, currently from the Eagles. He's played on all the Eagles on the Hell Freezes Over tour and played it. Timothy, if you're watching right now, yes, I'm going to say it. You played with White Snake for 8 years. But we met through photography and his love of photography. And what he does now is he surrounds himself in this translucent. We'll be sending out some info on that, this translucent material, and plays his compositions with all his video and his photography around it. We're like, man, that's awesome. And Todd Stanley from Deadliest Catch, some different people that we've got coming in. And Mike and Allie and I, we go back. Mike, I think Allie and I photographed your brother, Ken. Yeah. That was a really heartwarming story, how we met Ken and Wendy at the time. And then as Gianna grew, and by the way, Gianna and I have the same birthday, and yep. But we photographed Ken when he got remarried. And anyway, we just kind of got connected again just a few weeks ago through Professional Photographers of America. And the more we started talking, I'm like, man, this guy's got some great work. I'm like, Toby, Allie, look at this work, and let's have him on the show, because his story about going from the corporate world to becoming a professional photographer is an awesome story. So anyway, that's where we're going with this. It's just that spirit of hanging out, having a good time, learning, being inspired, talking about our struggles, talking about gear, and we'll be taking questions as well.
That's right. I love that you said this, David. This is going to be, I think, a fun mix of kind of the passion behind your photography, Mike, a little bit of the gear discussion as well, and maybe some tips and tricks for people that are also considering shooting sports or maybe just trying to get good pictures of their kids in sports.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. You've got a fantastic portfolio here. I love the stuff that I've thrown up on the screen. And just a reminder, you can see down below @ReactionPhotog is your Instagram to see lots more of your work. Folks, go follow that. And there'll be a link to that right down below in the show notes as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and how much your website is just reactionphotography.com, is that right, Mike?
Correct. Yeah.
That is right. And I can make that. I got the power to show that up too.
You got the power. You got the power. I can come over the banner.
There you are. Hey,
Stay behind the banner, Dave. It's where you belong.
All right. Yeah. So, welcome again, everybody. I just saw we got somebody from Brazil on right now. Man, it's crazy. So, Mike, and Allie, anyway, but before we continue, Allie, did you have anything you wanted to start with right now? I know that you have some questions about shooting under the lights and cheer and things like that as well, but anything right off the bat that you, besides saying hello?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for being on, and I'm really excited to see and talk about your really capturing that moment. And action photography is the epitome of capturing the moment. And a lot of our clients that study with us and go on trips do have kids in sports, and they always have questions and find that the toughest time is in the lower lights, on the nighttime under the stadium lights, or the indoor sports with the gym lights on, and you're not allowed to flash. So maybe we can talk about that before we're done tonight.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That's my life.
That's your life. So, Mike, why don't you kind of jump on in here, share with us a little bit about kind of your background. You've shared with us your story a little bit. You came out of the corporate world, but why don't you explain what that looks like, how and why you got into photography, how you transitioned, and we'll just kind of go from there. But we'd just love to hear your story.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on, you guys. This is amazing, and I'm just seeing people are constantly rolling in. So thanks to everybody for joining in. So my story's a little different. I've been shooting my whole life. I pretty much have had a camera since I was a little kid. Anytime I could take a picture, if I could, I would. But it really was digital photography that got me really kicked back into doing a lot more photography on a regular basis and wanting to start making some money doing business as a photographer. So this was the late 90s when the first sort of consumer level and more user accessible cameras came out. But my whole career for 20 years was in the corporate world. I spent 20 years between Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Getty Images, doing what's called product management. So working with software development teams building products. So I've worked on things like Xbox One, Office for Mac, did advertising stuff at Facebook. I'd worked on virtual reality, both at Getty Images and at Amazon. All the meanwhile, in probably 2002, 2003, when we had our first kid, I started taking lots of pictures of her and doing portrait and doing dance and things like that, and started having small opportunities in my own area. Someone would see my portraits that I did of my kids and said, "Oh my God, we need some portraits of our baby or our kid, or we need some dance photography. How much do you charge?" No idea. But kind of worked on it and figured it out and started making money. So around that same time, while I was early in my real career, I started my photography business on the side and was doing that ongoing all the way up until just a little over 2 years ago, 2017, late 2017. It's been about 20 years, literally exactly, in my tech career. I was done. My wife knew I was done. My family knew I was done. Just no one was saying it. It was just very obvious that I was done. And fortunately, my photography business was starting to, over those recent years, the last probably 3 to 5 years, had started really kind of taking an upward curve. We can talk more about that. But I took the leap. Fortunately, with the amazing support of my wife, who still has a full-time job, which was very helpful. But we took that leap of faith and took I will tell people, just being the reality of this, is we took a severe, drop in pay, me leaving a full-time product tech job to run a photography business full-time that, you only have so much business. I don't have a flourishing, wedding business where I'm shooting, big weddings every weekend or things like that. So there was a lot of planning, a lot of discussion, and we can, I'm happy to talk about tips and things that I've done.
Wow. Yeah. So just I'm sure there's been bumps along the way, Mike, as far as, obviously going from a full-time set check in the mail corporate gig, probably getting paid pretty well. And I'm sure, right now we're going through this really tough time, and now everybody's kind of in this place where, like, at least if you're a photographer and self-employed, very difficult. And you might think, oh man, if I was still there, but the reality of it is, I'd love to hear from you. You went from this corporate guy making probably six figures, I'm guessing. I would imagine.
Yes.
To all the situation with jumping into photography, and again, you want to be real with people because we get it all the time. Like, I'm going to be a professional photographer. I'm going to sell my work, and I'm going to sell portraits, and I'm going to sell portraits or prints of the Grand Canyon, et cetera, et cetera. But how hard of a struggle that is. But I will ask you this: even with that struggle, I bet that you found yourself maybe a little bit harder on the paycheck side, but maybe happier in life. We haven't talked about this, but
yeah,
what's that?
Yeah, absolutely, 1,000%. I think so. Two things. I'll talk about that first, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it was like. I would say my first year, maybe two, real quick, just so that you kind of understand. But yeah, absolutely, I would not, and my family. I've actually had some companies come back and say, hey, we could use your skills. Are you interested? And I'll of course I get, all puffed up because I'm excited that someone's interested. And I go talk to Megan, and Megan goes, no, you're not. No, we're not doing that. And for a number of reasons, for my own health and happiness, but also, on top of this, I'm actually homeschooling our seventh grader. I didn't mention this before, but, so I do that, during the day, and, it's been really helpful as a balance for our whole family. So yes, while we've sacrificed in some from a monetary perspective, and we've worked to figure that out, it actually has come back, I would say exponentially, from our whole family perspective. So yes, I would not trade it for the world. I will say one of the things, to talk about the beginning of it, and we talked about the lumps. I think that the biggest advice I can give to people is what I learned in the tech world is fail fast and learn early on, and be prepared to expect the unexpected, because every time I would think, my wife and I would sit down, I'll talk, her name's Megan, so I'll say Megan and I would sit down, and we would go, okay, I think this is the way we're going to go. It's at the beginning it was a lot of cheerleading, a little bit of dance work, but a lot of cheerleading competitions and shooting for certain teams and things like that. And we would say, all right, we're gonna work all the big competitions in the area, which was what I was doing, and that's going to be the way this is going to go. And we started out with a business model of trying to do it all live there with just she and I, and there was a whole number of things that we took lumps on in terms of efficiencies and processes and stuff, and then at the end, what the revenue came back to versus the amount of time, work, gear, all the things that we all as photographers have to think about when we're running our own business. And we kind of look at it, and we'd try a few times, and then we go, you know what, I think this, we've seen this trend in how this is going to go. Let's look at it, another way. And, you always take all that learning and you start to figure out what model works for you. And we can talk more in detail as it fits in, but I went from selling direct to customer to 95+% or 90 to 95% of my business is actually really B2B now. It's I actually go on contract with a number of private schools and a sports performance gym and a cheerleading association, where I'm more going at that level. They pay me, and then their customers get all my images for free to use for things like web and social and all that.
Wow, so that's a different way that a lot of people are going about it. So I definitely want to come back to that at some point.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure. And in fact, I know there's some people watching right now that are trying to figure that out for themselves right now. They're doing really well. I just saw some names pop up, but man, that's awesome. I love what you said. Fail fast, and then you said, but learn right away. Fail fast and then learn.
Yes.
And I love that. Beforehand you were talking about that you kind of started from the top down though. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you photographed, how that, you went from corporate, you were doing some big name stuff, and then you funneled it down to what maybe is the right business model for you. Yeah. Share a little bit about how that transitioned. And we talked about like sometimes it really is that relationship who that kind of leads you to other work.
Yeah, absolutely. And Toby, if you want it at some point, if you go, not my homepage, but my sports page, it's not the most current stuff, but it has some of my earlier on work, I believe, in there. So when I was at Microsoft, which was my longest tenured job, there's some in there. If you go to the next one, like here, that's some of my earlier stuff. When I was first, when I was probably middle of my career at Microsoft, there was a small team under the chief technology officer. So we were, it was a very small, very focused, high level team was built called the Rich Media Group. And we were focused on figuring out how do we get more creative professionals to use Windows platform and Microsoft services. It wasn't like the stuff of today we're talking about 15 years ago. Creative area, and still today it's an area where, Microsoft struggles a bit compared to Apple, but it's, we were trying to figure out what do we do? And my job for 3+ years was to go build relationships with and work with professional photographers all over the world to figure out what do we go do? What do we build? Is it something in Windows? Is it its own application? What do people need? And ironically, we actually were on the path of building stuff similar to like a Lightroom, and even back then it was Aperture came out right at the time when Adobe and Apple released their stuff. But that's a story for another day.
That sounds like a good story, Mike. You're making a good plug for coming back here.
It was just interesting, how you see something and you get excited and then you're like, oh hey, somebody else had that great idea. But no, so I built relationships with all sorts of photographers because we didn't know, we wanted to get input from everybody. So I names, I was working with people like Bambi Cantrell and Dennis Reggie in the wedding space, Matthew Jordan Smith in portrait work, Deanne Fitzmaurice, who worked for the San Francisco Chronicle, now does a lot of stuff for like ESPN and whatnot. I built relationships with Sports Illustrated. And my job was to go work with those folks and figure out, hey, what, I would go sit with them on their jobs actually, as much as I could. I wouldn't go to the weddings, but where I could, I would go sit on the jobs and see what they do and, talk with them. And with that, I had the advantage of being able to grow my own photography knowledge through that. And so one of the really cool things I got to do was I spent a lot of time with Bob Rosado and Peter Reed Miller from Sports Illustrated, or at the time they were with Sports Illustrated. Things are different now. And when they would come to Seattle, they would, bring extra lenses. They say, hey, bring your bodies, bring whatever gear you have. And, we only need so much help. You can just shoot. And we can talk about some, they wouldn't really be able to talk to me on the job, but they would, just kind of watch what they're doing. Where are they positioned? What are their settings? What are, how are they doing this stuff? And I would, look at it and start doing it and take what they did and find kind of my own voice for it. And I started building up a portfolio and I would edit stuff and send it off to them and they would give me tips. And I got very fortunate. At one point, USA Today Images, it was actually back then US Press Wire, that now is owned by USA Today Images. They needed second full-time Seattle photographer. And Bob Rosado from SI reached out and said, hey, throw a portfolio together and submit it to we'll get it submitted to the editors and see what happens. And I fortunately got that role. And so for a number of years, I was a stringer for US Data and Images. So I wasn't an employee of US Press Wire. I was a stringer, which means you pretty much shoot on spec. Early in the week, they say, hey, we need you for a Seahawks game. So at the time I was shooting Seahawks, Seattle Sounders, MLS stuff, UW, mostly football, and sometimes down to University of Oregon because Oregon was one of the top 10 teams back then. And, I'd get the heads up, hey, we're sending you credentials and whatnot. And then I would go shoot the game, edit, triage and edit on site, upload, and then I get paid based on usage. And to be quite clear, it was purely, and to this day, as stringers, it's a tough gig, but it was to gain experience. It was definitely not for the money, because by the time it all dwindles down on usage, unless you were like front page of SI or ESPN or San Francisco Chronicle, which I made, I got images published in some of those publications below the fold is what they call it. The money's not huge, but man, what an experience. So yeah, I started top down. I was very fortunate to be able to have that experience and really, got thrown in to the deep end very, very quickly.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. Toby, do you want to maybe take from there, or Allie, you want to talk about the gear he uses a little bit right now, and then kind of move in? I know that Allie, you were really interested in, and I am as well, about those moments, those special moments. But I also know we have a lot of people that are probably interested in what gear you use, and we need to make sure that this stays nice. Everybody out there that's Canon, Nikon, Sony, Olympus, whatever.
There's nobody fights about gear anymore. Nah. Except the Fuji
owners.
owners.
Stuff going on right now.
I want to hear Allie's questions first because I have built this channel on talking about gear, but it's been clear to me in my travels and working with people. There are some things that gear does matter to some degree, but it is about trying to figure out how to capture these moments out there. And so I'm curious to hear some of Allie's questions, and then we can talk a little gear specifics.
Okay. Yeah. So I was a cheer mom, ironically, because in high school I didn't like cheerleaders. So.
That was your punishment, getting one.
My daughter was a gymnast. Our kids have played, lacrosse and hockey and all kinds of nice, fast sports. So we've had a good time. Lacrosse is really fun to photograph. I feel like, in addition to getting great shots, it's fun. It's a challenge, and it's almost like, wouldn't you agree? It's almost like playing a video game in some sort, because you're keeping him in the frame. And you're keeping them focused, keeping them in the frame constantly.
Yes.
And then when you get those shots, you get like this little adrenaline rush. And you're like, yes, that was it.
Absolutely.
We had to keep you off the field a few times, Allie.
Pardon?
We had to keep you off the field a few times.
Yeah. Remember that hailing day? I thought the hail.
Did you have a question, or did you want me to talk about my cheer stuff and kind of that whole situation?
Yeah, I brought up cheer because it was challenging. And when people would ask me, well, what settings do you use? The stadium lights are really bright, but they're actually not to the camera, because our eyes have been standing there and looking and adjusting. And they're tumbling. They're moving very, very fast. You got to stop that action, and you can't use a flash, and so forth. So it's a real challenge to balance that, get that shutter speed up fast enough to capture that moment of action, and any other tips you'll have on photographing action in lower light, which I would consider that to be lower light, stadium lights at night, or indoor, exactly the competition indoor, theater performances, dance recitals. They're all kind of in the same boat as far as challenging to get your settings right.
Yeah, and actually, if you stop right there, Toby, on that one, that's just a good example. So yeah, man, I could spend the next hour talking about cheer photography, because I will tell you guys, to be honest with you, David asked me about my sort of top down learning in my career. As time went on, I actually left the stringer role because my full-time career was taking up, the time that needed to be. But honestly, it got to a certain point where the benefits were no longer outweighing the cons. And so, I had to step away from the what I'll call the glamour of the really cool, what I'll say, photography of shooting, Seahawks and UW and all that. And, as we kind of, a little bit later, it was still dance, a lot of dance for me, which is where I grew a lot of my skill set. And then where I will say I actually have grown the most shooting in my sports career is cheerleading photography. And it's because of everything that you were just saying. Yes, the stadium lights can be bright even in a good stadium, but remember, those lights at a football game are meant for the football players, not the cheerleaders. The cheerleaders are on the sidelines, and so the lighting isn't so great on them at that. And even in this is a high school gym. This is actually the gym where my daughter goes. That's not her, but this is a gym where the coach. Basically, the only real lighting in this gym for this competition is a single massive light straight down, like it's like meant for wrestling. It's like a straight down light with a little bit of the gym lights on. And most of that brightness is coming from me really boosting that up. I will pretty much guarantee you that image is probably shot at ISO 16,500 to 25.6.
Wow.
Somewhere in that range. I shoot really, really high ISOs, but I have had images printed to like 16:20 from parents that absolutely love them. So it can happen. But yeah, with cheerleading.
Wow.
I just wanted to make sure no one misheard you. I just,
Yeah.
those are high ISOs. So it's going to be interesting to talk a little bit about your gear, but I do think higher ISOs scare a lot of people. So continue. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. And so, with cheerleading, it's phenomenal because you have anywhere from sometimes 4 to 6, but you often have 8, 10, 12 to 20 some odd kids on a mat. And all cheer routines are 2.5 minutes long. That is how long they are. So you look at this, that if you go back one, you look at that picture, however many there are there. I have 2.5 minutes to try to get pictures of all those kids, and not of their backsides, not of how their bodies look the minute they hit the mat, not the closed eye or weird faces, like pictures that their parents actually want, those moments, the reactions. I have to capture that. And that is not easy to do in low light, with high ISOs, and kids moving, like this, and kids flipping. And so, some of it's gear. Absolutely. I'm not gonna lie. Some of it is the gear helps me. I mean, and that's one of the big reasons I went to Sony, and we can get into that whole path. Not that I couldn't shoot these. I shot great, just as good images with Canon when I was shooting Canon, but the Sonys made my life easier, and we'll talk about that. But cheerleading, it taught me how to anticipate, taught me how to listen to the music. Not only do I have to shoot all these kids, but I don't know their routines. I know the ones my daughter's on, but I don't know this team's routine. So I have to guess based on what they're doing. And so one of the things I tell people all the time is really make sure you're paying attention to the sport you're shooting. If you're going to shoot basketball, make sure you know a bit about basketball. If you're going to shoot cheerleading, make sure you know. And I will say dance helped my cheerleading shooting a ton because it's much faster, but the kids still run on an 8 count, right? Everything runs on an 8 beat. If you play guitar, you play piano, you go to dance recitals, whatever, you've got 8 beats, 8 counts. And I'm like the worst dancer in the world. To ask my family, I guarantee if they're listening or watching right now, they're all laughing at me. I'm terrible. But I learned to listen for an 8 count. And so you can anticipate when you got a team that has kids that do all the cool flipping and tumbling, you listen to the beats of the music coming and you kind of keep an eye open on what's going on, and you can see somebody starting to move to a corner. So, I will say, if you have the chance, if you're trying to get into sports photography, I guarantee you there's cheerleading teams in your area that would kill to have you there, because it's not a sport that most people gravitate towards when they think of sports shooting. But in terms of the low light, yeah, it's not easy. And I will be honest with you, I pretty much have my gear is I shoot now I shoot 2 Sony A9 IIs. And I have all either 2.8 glass, or sometimes I'm shooting even primes. Some cheer competitions I'll shoot. If I'm up right in the front row, I'll bring like my I'll have like a 24-1.4, a 50-1.4, and I think an 85-1.8 because it's faster focusing. The 135 is a little too long sometimes, but these people shy away when they hear that. They're like, oh my gosh, this guy's using thousands of dollars of gear. Well, yes, this is my full-time job and it's what I do. So, Allie and David, they have the best gear possible for their wedding clients or their portrait clients, because that's what the clients, demand. But remember, there are local camera shops, or there are online rentals, lensrentals.com, or here in Seattle, we have Glazer's Camera, where if you rent at Glazer's Friday afternoon and bring it back Monday morning, they consider that one day. So you could rent this $2,000 lens for a whole weekend, and you're paying a one-day rate.
Yeah, that's great. Yep. Yeah. So, all right. So you've led into the gear talk a little bit and shared some of your lenses and some of your gear. Take us outside, though. So some of the shots we saw: football, soccer, lacrosse. What do you same bodies? What kind of lenses do you gravitate towards for those?
So pretty much 99% of my field work is with the 400 2.8. So the big, you see the guys on the sidelines, or guys or girls on the sidelines with huge, mostly white lenses. So a 400 2.8, and if it's daylight, if I've got a good amount of light, I will often throw like a 1.4 teleconverter on it. So I'm shooting at, what is that? I think it's 560 at f4. So I'm pretty much always shooting wide open on that lens. There's the reason you bought it was for that. You'll see there the first 2 pictures of me there shooting that big Canon. And then the other main one that I shoot, which you see in the far right upper corner, is the 70 to 200 2.8. That lens, you'll hear it from any one of us that talks to you. If you're shooting any kind of sports action, things like that, the 70 to even a wedding photographer will often tell you too, the 70 to 200 is like the lens. If you have to buy one lens, invest your money in that one, because I shoot it at night at high ISOs. I shoot it in day. I always have, in any field sport, those 2 are the ones there. And then I'm usually using a third body, either a regular A9 or an A7 R4 with a 24-70 or something wide, because there's always those sideline moments, or at the end of the game where people are running to each other and things like that, where you're going to have to get in there and shoot something a little bit wider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So are you wearing all 3 of these cameras?
So yeah, if you flip back to that profile thing, you'll see me wearing, I'm almost always wearing an orange one. It's hard. I don't know if they blow up or not. I don't think they do, but
they don't. I can do a little magic.
Oh, there you go. So you can kind of see it on my back. Right there. There you go. So this particular one is from a company called Holdfast Gear. A lot of wedding photographers know it because that's where it started. It was called the Moneymaker. It's made in leather, and he has a ton of different ones. But this one is actually called the Camera Swag. And he made one out of it's like a nylon-y material for, I think, people that didn't want the leather. But honestly, for me, in the action world, running around all the time, I get hot and sweaty, and so the leather just gets hot. So and it weighs more. So I have my 70-200 is always on my right side, and my 24-70 or my wider is on my left side, hanging down on the sides.
Nice.
Okay.
So 3 cameras typically then that you've got on
Yep.
when you're capturing. And again, if I heard you right, sometimes depending on where you're, like if it's a cheer competition, if you're in the front row, you might use some prime lenses. So of course you're limited, so different camera bodies. But I'm thinking through that, Mike. I just want to take a step back. I looked at a couple of those group shots of the cheer, and the one group shot, I counted over 18 kids in there, 18 girls in there. And I'm thinking you have 2.5 minutes to capture each individual person with good expressions so that the contract that you're contracted for, the people are going to be happy. And yet you also have to capture the group. I mean, yes.
I had the shivers when you were talking about that. It scares the crumb out of me.
And honestly, I love all sports that I shoot, but I have a particular. My daughter actually is in this picture. She's the blonde in the bottom right, with a girl sitting on her shoulder. That's my daughter. Yeah, it takes a long time to get used to it. And I actually have a few local photographers that I've started sort of casually mentoring in how I do this. And what I do is, if I'm shooting like my prime one will be a 70-200. For these big ones right here, real quick, like that, I'm actually sitting way in the back of the gym, and I'm actually hand holding 300 or 400. Crazy enough, and then I've got my 70-200 on a tripod with a pro photo trigger and a foot pedal. And when I've got pictures of that too. It's pretty funny. But when I see the kids all lining up for that big pyramid, I'm still needing to use the time to take those individual pictures. But I've got the 70-200 set up and pretty much pre-focused, and I just start firing off with the foot pedal at the same time. So I'm now doubling up my image volume. But when I am that up close and kind of your question about getting all those kids individually, I actually have a pattern that I start to do when there's certain components of cheer that I won't go into, but you can see these what's called stunt groups where there's 3 at the bottom and 1 at the top. And I will, when I start to see them break into their little groups, that's when I start trying to get them all individually. And I will literally go almost left to right. And you'll see me, some of the dads that are starting to shoot cheer laugh at me, but you'll see me going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And I'm literally, doing this, kind of spraying across the way as I make sure that I get those pictures of those kids. And I'm doing that multiple times in a 2.5 minute routine so that I can ensure that I get them. Because, if you look at this picture, for example, that we have on the screen, just you guys, thinking about it, what are if you had to pick the 3 kids that probably get their picture taken the most, which 3 are they?
The Flyers.
The Flyers, the ones that are sitting at the top of that pyramid. It's where everybody's eyes go. So then I get all these parents that are, I take the pictures of the kids at the bottom. And I constantly, the people I hear the feedback from the most are the people of the kids that are the ones at the bottom in the back. They're called the back spot. And it's because they go, oh my God, I thank you so much. My kid's been cheering for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And that is the first good image anybody has ever taken of my kid.
That's awesome.
Because they're in that position. That is the job they have. Mm-hmm. But it's not the front and center featured glamorous one where the kid's sitting up top in the middle where everybody looks. Mm-hmm. So I had, I have this rhythm that I have to do. And, we kind of get into the gear comments a little bit, but this is the stuff where Sony helps me, to be honest with you. And I'll get a little bit gear heavy for a second. Their autofocus with the facial recognition and face lock
So I'm sorry, you're using Sony Sony lenses as well. I know that you were using some Canon lenses before. I don't know if you ever went Canon to Sony body. Maybe you ran into some focusing problems there. But
I did shoot for a little while, especially on the bigger glass, because it took me a little bit of time to sell that, to buy the new stuff. I used some Canon gear with the Metabones adapter, which was the one at the time, was sort of the main one. And yeah, you lose a little bit of your frame rate with that. And then the focus isn't quite as snappy, but it still worked, I would say, fairly well. I mean, the fact is that the face lock is still there. The AF recognition is still there. And the focus speed was pretty snappy. I mean, I would say, it was definitely as good as my Canon, so I wasn't taking a step back. Some of the other benefits I was getting, regardless of what lens mount I was putting onto that Sony body is, and here comes the controversial one, is I actually love shooting with the EVF, the electronic viewfinder.
And I think it's less and less controversial. I think it's just really a couple grumpy old holdouts out there, but go ahead.
Hey.
I wasn't gonna. Can I finger point into the corner? But no. Yeah. And David's not alone, and Allie's not alone. There's a lot of folks that feel that way, and there's nothing wrong either way. I think the thing for me, when I'm shooting things like dance was the big one. And in fact, the original A9 came out in 2017. And I remember I had my 1DX2 and I got Sony to send me an A9. I took a Sony 7200 and a Canon 7200. And there was two things that locked me in, three that day. One was the autofocus, right? So those dancers are moving along and I'm watching just, as I'm, and I could dial in how locked in I wanted it to be versus changing, and it's doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And so me being able to be in that viewfinder and having my ability to quickly change my ISO, I'm shooting wide open and whatever shutter speed I'm at, but being able to see in that viewfinder as I adjust my ISO, as I adjust my shutter speed, what that exposure is looking like live in the viewfinder, that knowing exactly what I was going to get. I didn't ever have to look at a picture that I took. I could see what I was going to get. And that's the power of that EVF, is as you adjust your settings, you can see exactly what's happening. I mean, yes, we all have the exposure meter that helps, but really being able to see that, because you're not sure when those spotlights are in there, is it really hitting that exposure just right? And so that was a huge thing. The third one was the funniest part was I shot on the silent shutter. I turned the shutter sound off because, on the electronic shutter for the Sony, it's a fake sound. So, I turned it off. And I've been shooting this studio for years, and I'm shooting both the Canon and the Sony. So I'm sitting there and I'm firing away, and this thing shoots 20 frames a second, right? So I'm shooting 20 frames, shooting 20 frames, shooting 20 frames. And my wife's sitting next to me. I'm working this competition. My wife's sitting next to me. Between a dance, she goes, what are you doing? Why, you've missed like 4 routines. I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't even thought about what she's talking about. And she goes, I'm not hearing the slap, 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 slap. And I went, oh yeah. By the way, the Sony has, this one that I'm trying, it has a silent shutter. She's like, man, if the images, if you like the images out of this thing, you need to go with that. Like, that's crazy. Yeah. Because in these dance recitals, you've got kids that are doing solos or ballet routines. It's not all hip hop and loud music. And so in a very silent, graceful ballet, kids holding, not ballet, but like she's doing a routine where she's, doing some pose. And then the camera, it's just like wet, just goes slap, 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 slap. And the Canons and Nikons have done work to help reduce those sounds, but having it be able to go so silent, those were the huge things that sort of solidified my move over. Yeah,
cool. So a lot of praise for the original A9. You mentioned you're now shooting with A9 Mark IIs. How do you feel? Is that upgrade? Was that upgrade worthwhile? Let's start. I'll just start with that. Was it up worthwhile for you?
For me, yes. And I will say for a lot of people, not necessarily, and I can kind of talk about why. So number one, the actual physical body itself got better.
Mm-hmm.
They made it a little bit more robust in terms of how the grip is and the hand grip. Just the robustness of the body got much better. So the gripability and just the overall ruggedness, so a little bit better weatherproofing, things like that, made it just a better fit. And as somebody that is constantly having his cameras get knocked all over the place, that's huge.
Yep.
So from that perspective, I would say yes. I would also say that the autofocus and some of the functionality of just the AF is better.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, so as much as I can eke out of that, it is going to be better for me and what I do. But I will say for folks that are either thinking about upgrade, but maybe are worried about the budgets, or they are thinking about getting into Sony, I still use my A9s plenty, because either I use them for remote work, or if I need that third camera, I don't need a third A9 II for what I do. But Sony is constantly updating their firmware, and Toby, you know this, but like they did a massive upgrade to the A9 just last year in terms of the firmware, and a lot of the autofocus improvements that you see in the A9 II are in the A9. It's just that the processor and some of the actual physical components have improved in the A9 II that just make it a little bit better. But Sony has not left that A9 behind. And that's one thing that I think is pretty amazing, is that, they are kind of computers. And so they upgrade them and they do it. So I tell people, if you don't need those small incremental improvements, and the other big thing is for people that do a lot of workflow. So for people that shoot media, shoot things for like, Getty Images or newspapers or whatever, or people actually, what I do a lot of times that we can talk about if people are interested, is pretty much every shoot I do, I am live transferring some selects from my camera to my phone and editing in my phone and getting to my client right there.
Wow.
And Sony greatly improved the networking capabilities of the A9 II, and it just works that much more reliably between the camera and the phone.
Nice. And, I don't mean to put you on the spot, because I didn't pre-provide you any questions at all, but I'm curious, as a sports photographer, what do you want to see from Sony next to keep you happy? Could be camera lenses or something else. More foot pedals.
Yeah, the foot pedals Pocket Wizard does all that amazing work.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
We come back if you want.
Yeah. Let me think about that a little bit. I think there are still some lenses that it's kind of an easy answer, but it is true. I think there's still a few lenses. Sony is still new in this game. I think there's some lenses that they could throw in there that we sports photographers love, that I'm jealous of like the Nikons. The 2-4 that Nikon has is phenomenal because of the aperture that it's at. Sony just came out with a 2-6, which is a beautiful lens, but for me it's a 5.3 to 6.5, I think. So it's if I'm shooting track and field during the day, great. Or soccer during the day, great. But as soon as but then of course you're also losing some of that separation when you're going at that deep of an aperture.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would say that's one. Okay. But I'll think about the from the camera side. I mean, we always talk about. I guess this is one thing I will say. Sony can always improve their menu system.
Yeah.
I'll give this as an opportunity for Dave to chime in on that one.
So I like Nikon's menu system.
None of them are perfect. But to address that real quick, because people do ask me, well, God, what about that horrendous menu system? And it is. I mean, it's crazy how much there is. And I will say one thing. I guess one thing I will say, Toby, is consistency across their cameras. I don't know how common it is for pros to have this, but you'll see some things. They're generally in the same buckets, but they're not always on the same page. So going from like an A7R4 to an A9 II, like the format is not is not always on the same page.
Yeah.
But I will say, shooting with it full time for 3 years now, I rarely go deep into the menu system. I have like 2 or 3 things I need to do in the menus. I rarely pull my face away because I have things set up where like I know exactly where my ISO button is and I can change my ISO on the fly without pulling my face away.
Yeah.
So, I say for anybody that wants any camera system, you're going to be, it's like switching from iPhone to Android. They're both great, or vice versa. They're both great, but they're going to take a little while to get used to.
Yeah. Cool. All right, good.
I would just like to, I was just going to say that there's a couple questions alluding to this, but I'd like to just come back around to your settings a little bit, because there are people that are asking about settings. Somebody I know, I've got a list of questions here. I know somebody asked about auto ISO. Somebody asked about, Kevin asked about, do you deal with 16,000 to 25,000 ISO in post? How do you deal with it? So my question is, I get the feeling that with your Sony, you're feeling like at those high ISOs, you're getting maybe some better quality as well. But that's extreme high. So are your settings, you're not shooting auto ISO, even though lighting might be changing. You're not shooting shutter priority. Kind of what's let's just kind of go with, obviously lighting changes, but let's just kind of go with, indoor tough, like Ali was saying, indoor cheer or indoor, basketball. You have to stop the action. So obviously you need a high shutter speed.
Yep.
And you're typically shooting wide open f-stop aperture too, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, and I apologize. We all have this at home. If you hear my dog barking in the back, apologies. Yeah. So it's not easy, but I used to probably up until, so first of all, I haven't taken my cameras out of manual in 3 to 5 years at least. I shoot.
Let's want to make sure, because we do. I was going to say, sorry to interrupt. We have some beginner photographers on here as well. When we talk about manual, some people think we're talking manual focus, so we're not talking manual focus. We're talking your manual settings.
Yes.
Just to make sure we clarify. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll specify. So yes, my cameras are always, for what I do, always autofocus. Absolutely. And in fact, to be clear, I shoot the bulk of my work, at least with my 70 to 200 and 400, is on what's called AFC in Sony world. So continuous autofocus. So it's always autofocusing. And then there's settings within that really dial in what I need to do depending on the sport. And Sony actually has a phenomenal sports focus setting PDF that you can grab that'll tell you the sport and tell you recommended settings to try, and it's a great place to start and then dial it in for yourself. But I shoot autofocus, continuous autofocus, and I'm mostly shooting at high frame rate. Sometimes I'll bring it down a little bit, but I am shooting at that 20 frames a second, especially when I'm shooting things like cheer. Yes, my volume is higher in terms of images go through. Yeah. But when I'm moving around that much, I need that help. It's, I guess need is a strong word because I did it with Canon for so long too. I love that help. And I tell people, as much as you can get help from the gear, great, go for it. That's what it's there for. It's not cheating. So I'm shooting at the high frame rate and continuous focus. When I say manual, it means I am constantly in control of my aperture, my shutter speed, and my ISO. And when I'm shooting any low light, any indoor stuff, I am always wide open, unless it's with that wide angle lens and it's shooting a whole group of kids like after the competition or whatever, and then I can bring my shutter down, which means I can up my aperture to make sure everybody's in focus, right? So that I don't have the edge kids out of focus and things like that. But for that action, the peak action work, I'm always I'm just going to say 2.8. I'm always wide open, but let's talk about the 2.8 lenses because that's what most people have. So I'm shooting at that 2.8. Yeah.
After that, can you circle back to focus?
Yes.
Because one of the questions was with quick moving sports, how do you keep focus? And maybe you can explain what that setting does for you. Because
Sure.
there's several aspects to focus.
Absolutely. So I'm shooting at 2.8, and then my shutter speed depends on the sport. If it's, pretty fast moving stuff, man, I really don't like to come slower than 1/1000. Because sometimes I'm in some crappy gyms. I mean, I'm in some really tough lit gyms. Toby, make a quick note to remind me about one more feature of the A9 II that's important with that. Sometimes I have to go down to 1/800 or 1/1000 just so that ISO can, come down a little bit. Ideally I'm shooting, I will start a football game that's at sun is just starting to set. I will shoot it, 1/2000, 1/1600 in terms of shutter speed. And my ISO can sit in the 4, 5, 6400 range, 4000, 5000, 6400. But very quickly, as that last bit of sun goes away and I'm 100% reliant upon the available light from the stadium, my ISOs immediately will go to, it's like I can't remember the exact numbers that Sony does, but it's like 12,800, 16.5, 20,000, and then 25,600. I try not to go that high in a football stadium because it's just so dark and I have to do, quite often I'll have to crop some with football games. And so I need as much resolution and low noise as possible. But I haven't shied away from it. And why is that? And if you go look at my images on Instagram, you'll go look at, any of my football pictures at night, or any of my, any stuff that's at night. If you go back to my homepage, for example, Toby, and there's a picture of a quarterback that's in all black background. And it's in that one, for example, that's shot at a fairly high ISO, but the image looks clean. And I will run my images through, through some noise reduction. And that sometimes, if I'm doing a lot of images, I will just do it through Lightroom. So in Lightroom's editing tools, there is a slider for noise reduction, and I will bring that up to bring that noise down a little bit. If I'm editing single images for things like portfolios, like this image or whatever the case may be, the two tools that I use is either from Nick, NIK, or a product called Topaz that does noise reduction very well. And those tools have gotten so good that it has allowed me the freedom to really push those ISOs up. I mean, if you're going through these images, you're seeing a mix of some daylight stuff, but you're really seeing a lot of my images that are, in rain, in cloud, in dark, in gym. And that's what I have to deal with. So it's either capture that peak moment. I mean, my business is called reaction photography. I got to get the reaction. I got to get the peak action. I got to get that moment. And I got to get it sharp and in focus. And if you ask any sports photographer, they will tell you any day of the week, they will take noise over blur.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to clarify, because one of the things you said, because again, we have some new people, not new people, but beginner photographers. We're not saying that you just go out in the middle of the day. You're not saying you just go out in the middle of the day and start at 12,800 and higher on your ISO. You're saying you get there as it gets darker in order to keep bringing your shutter speed faster. And it sounds like, from what I'm understanding, you're going pretty wide open. You're going wide open on your f-stop.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting a shutter speed that you need to stop that movement. But whatever it is you're photographing a cheer, you need a super fast shutter speed, as opposed to maybe a t-ball game. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Just right. And then you're adjusting your ISO as you need to as it gets darker. That's kind of the steps that I hear how you're working these images, and then the focusing, you're using continuous focus.
Yep.
Which is what Allie was asking too, and I know Sue Stevens asked that. You're continually following and using these 20 frames a second to focus on that one person.
Yep.
And make sure you get the emotion and a sharp image, and you'll deal with the noise later. If I'm understanding this as a
Yeah, you absolutely have it right. And one example I'll give you real quick is there was a football game I shot in fall where we started it, I think like 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. We had sunlight, and I was shooting still 2.8. And the reason I shoot 2.8 for the beginner learners, when you're shooting sports, you want to separate that action from the background. You want, I'm shooting for my customers, but and sometimes my customers are Getty Images, hires me to do some stuff. And if those images are going out that are going to be used in the press or wherever it is, they don't want the crowd behind in full sharpness. You want the athlete, and then, you want everything else kind of to get away. So that's what that 2.8 is doing for me, where I was shooting 2.8, I think at like 1/2000 or 2500, super fast shutter speed. And it was so bright that I still was getting my ISO down to like 100. So, these were, some of the...
That 2.8, guys that have taken our class, is the widest opening, so it's letting the most amount of light in that lens can do. So that helps then your other two settings, your shutter speed to be able to be faster and your ISO to be able to be lower.
Absolutely. And so, I started at 100. Those images are, they're amazing. They're clean. I love them. I use them all the time. And then as the night started to drop, the stadium's lighting wasn't that great. So what I did was, as much as I could, I started boosting up my ISO, right? I was going, up to 2 to 4 to 8. It was, moving up fairly quick. And then as I got into those 2,500, 4,000, range, starting to get into that mid-level where noise is going to start coming in, I started bringing my shutter speed down. So I'm still at 2.8, always 2.8. But then, I try to keep that shutter speed as high as I can for as long as I can, because again, sharpness over noise. So let that ISO go up. But then at a certain point when I'm getting, up to 10,000 plus ISO, I start bringing my shutter speed down a little bit, and it starts to become a little bit of a balance. And again, this is getting to be much more advanced, than sometimes necessary. And one way to avoid that is to use auto ISO. There's nothing wrong with auto ISO. I have just found that I get better accuracy of my exposure by myself controlling it, but I've also been shooting these sports with this gear for years. So there's nothing wrong with trying out shutter priority. There's nothing wrong with trying out auto ISO and setting a nice range and letting your camera help you, because the tools in Lightroom and everything else are so great that, as long as you don't blow things out, meaning overexpose where you lose, where you're overexposing so far, you can really manipulate and recover a lot. So, I'm just giving my workflow, and I know it's very complex. So things like auto ISO are fantastic tools, as is shutter priority, to help keep that shutter up and let the camera help you a little bit.
Yeah, that's what we tell people that are brand new and they're going out on a life safari or they're going to photograph action sports. If they're unsure, that's a great place to go. You go shutter priority, auto ISO, and just control that shutter. And as you learn and you grow and you get better, then you can start making some more advanced choices for your gear and what you know and what you do. So that's great advice.
Yeah. I really like Jeff's question for you, Mike. When doing pro sports, how do you balance where to stand to get the shots? Do you stay in one spot for a while, or are you constantly moving? And it probably depends some on sports. So maybe pick one sport to answer with or talk about.
I'd like to hear how it works for either the Sounders or the Seahawks. Something that is just so 100 yards.
Yeah. And actually, those are two good examples. So there's a couple things. One, when you get, so for those that are trying to learn and things like that, high school and youth is a great place because there's so much flexibility for you to be able to move around and learn, because you may not have that 400 millimeter lens. So you can move along the sides and move around, and, they don't care as much, and they're just happy to have you there as long as you're not going crazy and getting in the way. But when you get to that college and pro level, I'll talk about football, I'll talk about soccer, and I'll talk about basketball. When you're going at the Seahawks or any football stadium for that matter, college or pro, you can't be between the 20s, meaning where the bench goes. So you can kind of move along the sides and the end zones, but once you get up to the 20-yard line, there's or is it between the 40s? Sorry, I think it's between the 40s. There's a line that basically is where the team stands. And there's a kind of a rope and security guards typically at these places. And once you go to cross over that, you can't stop. You can't stop even if someone famous is crying on the bench. You can't stop and snap that shot. Security will be on you really fast. And so they'll tell you to move on. But, so you gotta, once you get past that, you gotta move to the other side. But between that, if you're on the sidelines, you can stand or kneel. There's a line that you can't cross that's between the sidelines. There's a line that you have to stay behind. Once you're in the end zones, you have to kneel down all the time. I mean, you can walk to get to go to the other side, but if you're going to stop and shoot, you have to kneel down. And so for something like football, it's really dependent upon the team. I tell people all the time, if you're going to be shooting a sport, know the sport, and then even better, know the team. So there's a high school program I shoot for. They've got the number one pocket passer quarterback in the country. The kid's already set up to go to UW, and he's only a junior this year. And they've got some of the top receivers, in the state as well. They run the ball, they do. But this kid can put up some crazy down the field throws, and they do a lot. So I spend more of my time when they're on offense, even if they're, pretty far back, because I have that long lens. I spend more time kind of on the side and in the end zone, hoping that they're going to make those plays, or knowing what I've known of that team. So
go ahead.
The reason I bring that up is it's just the more you can get to know what they do, helps you even beyond knowing the sport itself. So for football, I tend to spend more of my time on the end zones and a little bit up the side. I don't spend a lot of time running back and forth unless I need to capture both teams. That's the other point, is who are you shooting for? So if I'm shooting for one high school, it's a lot easier, because when they're on offense, I don't care what the defense is doing. It doesn't matter to me. So I can specifically position myself for the offense. If you're shooting for a newspaper, you need to capture the game. And so you need to play both sides of things and really think about who are the key players, who's having the best game, who's the most controversial, who's the one that's about to get signed by a big college. All those things come into play to where you then need to tell the whole story of the game. So it depends on who I'm shooting for, and you can see kind of the two different ways. Soccer, you are only allowed to be in these little kind of end spots. You don't have as much flexibility to move. You kind of get planted for a half. So you kind of find your spot, and that's kind of where you're shooting. You can move around kind of in your area, but you aren't really moving a ton. Like, you're not going up and down the field, which you don't want to anyway, because soccer moves so fast, you'd be running. And then basketball, when you get to the NBA, college, things like that, there's a piece of carpet, and there's little strips of tape, and I'm telling you, my daughter could barely fit in these slices of tape that they give you, and I'm not the smallest guy, so you got all these people scrunching in, and you have the flexibility to pick your spot before the half starts. You kind of go out there early and you plunk your gear down, you got your spot. But when you get to even bigger games, you have an assigned spot. And the bigger the name of the press, the better spot they get. So you got to, you got to deal with what you got to deal with. And so that's why you bring your flexible, you bring your variety of gear and you adjust for the situation that you get put in.
Nice.
I know we got to get to some of the other questions. I do have one question for you, Mike, in regards to photographing basketball, at least at the pro level and the college level.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you work with Pocket Wizard transmitters. For those of you who don't know, the transmitter goes on your camera and it will fire your flashes via radio control or cameras via radio control. I haven't really shot too much in professional sports, a few hockey games, but not a whole lot. But I know with basketball, at least a lot of the stadiums, of course, we're not in them right at the moment, but aren't there in a lot of these stadiums flashes built up around the roof that you can tie into? Is that the case, or am I mistaken on that? Where photographers tie into those?
So it's there, unfortunately. And Toby, I'm sending you a link real quick.
Sure.
That you can bring up for people to see. Unfortunately, when you're in a stadium, so like if I'm at UW, you will sometimes have different photographers being able to tie into lights, but you can't just share a set of lights with multiple photographers. And that is because whatever Getty and AP are both sharing the same lights, and the two photographers are slightly off in their shutter. When's that flat? What's the flat? They're fighting for the flash. And so it's really an agreement that you make with the arena or the school or whoever that you're shooting for at, as to whether or not they will allow you to install the strobes up there. So I don't personally shoot with strobes. I have not gotten a high school to have me or let me do that yet. And some of the ones I shoot in aren't necessarily conducive to that in terms of the way the stadium is structured. But this high school that I do a bunch of work with, Kennedy Catholic, they're a great high school to work with. And they allowed me to mount a camera behind the backboard. And so, as Toby was scrolling down, he kind of zoomed in on me mounting the whole camera. But you've got these arms up there that you hook up, and then you can see me in the top left picture. You can see me messing around with that thing mounted to my camera, which is the Pocket Wizard. And that has a little cord that plugs into the side of my camera. And then I have another one of those that I can use in a number of ways. I can either mount it to the camera in my hand, and every time I fire the camera in my hand, it fires this camera that's mounted on the backboard, which is what I did in a basketball situation, because there's just too much action for me to do it any other way. The other way would be to have it in your pocket or in your hand and just push the button on the remote trigger and it will fire the other one off, which is great if you have an assistant or somebody like that. When I'm shooting cheerleading, I will have one of those cameras on a little mini tripod right at the front of the cheer mat, and that remote. And that's when I have just the other trigger, the one that is the remote controlling the one that's going to take the pictures. I have that just sitting like on my bag with a little foot pedal. And I wish I had it with me. I would hold it up and show it, but it's this little foot pedal, and it literally sits under my toes. And as I'm firing off, all these, pictures, I will see something happening in the middle, and I'll just step on that foot pedal, and it just starts firing that other camera.
That's cool.
So what you're saying here is that in one game, let's just say one high school basketball game, the press may use one photo, and you've taken 10,000 photos.
Yep. And
a lot of those are not great photos.
Nope.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that sometimes our people get so worried, oh, I got 3 great shots and I took all of this, but you're just firing away trying to get those expressions and those images. And sometimes you're not looking. See, even on your website, you don't put a ton of the same person. You've got that great shot with the tennis, the gal playing tennis, the great shot of the special one is the guy in the wheelchair, and it's just that one shot tells that story.
Yep.
And that's what you're going for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I consider myself more of a sports journalist than just a sports photographer, right? Like my goal is for you to be able to look at an image and have a story there, whether that story is for the parent, whether that story is for mass consumption in Seattle Times, it doesn't matter, but that should be a moment. And that's what I'm going for. If you ask, what do you guys, so I'm way more in awe of what David and Allie do for their profession than what I do, because their goal number of keepers is way higher than what I'm shooting for we're
not photographing weddings anymore, Mike.
Well, okay. In what you use for the wedding photographer and what you used to do, you guys know what I mean, though. In sports or any, if you come out, yes, you need a bunch of images to tell the story of the day. And I get plenty of those. I get plenty of action shots that tell the day. But what I am personally going for is if I can get 1 to 3, like, wow, those are, yes, that's the one, then that's great. And those will be the ones that go on the website. For those of you that are trying to build your business, don't overload your website. If you paid any attention, or if you noticed when Toby was on my homepage, there was, whatever it was, 30, 40 images. But then when you dove into like sports or even cheer per se, the volume got much lower. And the reason that is, I've spent time talking to the director of photography for Getty Images and for the Players Tribune. And I've had opportunity at workshops and things like that to meet with these people. And they will tell you your best work needs to be on your homepage. For those kinds of folks, meaning the types of editors for a newspaper, or if you're wanting to get hired to shoot some games for Getty Images and things like that, that homepage needs to best represent your work, because they're generally not going to even click on that portfolio. They're going to look right here, and they're going to say, okay, I got a sense of what this guy can do. And even if they're hiring me to shoot something, they hired me, actually the first paid gig I got from Getty was to shoot a NASCAR event up here. I never shot a car in my life. Look, there's no car images, no car racing. But they said, okay, the guy can capture, he knows where to be, he'll figure it out, he knows how to capture the peak moment, he knows how to edit, and that's what you want to represent on your homepage, is what is the content that is going to best represent my work.
Nice.
Well, nice. And I do know, Toby, we got to start wrapping up here soon. There's a few more questions, but on that, there was Kevin Walk. He actually does photograph out at racetracks a lot, and you don't have any of those images. But do you photograph NASCAR? Do you still photograph any racetrack much, or just when you get a call to do it?
When I get the call to do it, I would love to do more. It was fun. It's a long day. It's a very long day, because you're often stuck like inside, once the racing starts in these smaller tracks, there's no tunnel to get back to the outside. So like you're inside there for that whole day with some serious headphones on. It's loud, but man, what action. It's a lot of fun. It's hard. It's a hard sport to shoot. But no, I mean, I don't really have the opportunity as much, especially the bulk of my work right now is high schools. And I think one thing, I know we have 10 minutes, but this is one thing I definitely would like to highlight for the people that are wanting to break into this. And maybe this is a good place to do this. And I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn, but there are opportunities for you wherever you're at. You guys heard me talk about shooting my daughter's dance recitals and shooting my daughter's cheer. I didn't jump into getting paid for these gigs right away. I started taking pictures of my kids, and sometimes, their dance team, meaning like, if they're in a group of 4 to 6 kids, well, I'm taking pictures of the 4 to 6 kids sometimes, and I'm going, oh, hey, here, have these or whatever. Well, that's how you start building your experience, and that's how you start building your reputation. And it's okay. People ask me all the time, is it okay to work for free? It's always a big, tough question. And in general, no, you shouldn't just constantly hand your content away. But if there is an opportunity that makes sense, especially when you're starting to learn, as long as there's a give and take, it is okay, I think, to do some stuff for free. And one example I'll give is this place I shoot for now called Ford Sports Performance. They train. If you when you go to my Instagram, you'll see a bunch of these like gym workout stuff and kids playing 7-on-7 with yellow and blue. That's this place. They, I got a connection from them the day before they were starting some NFL offseason training workouts last summer. Literally the Sunday before, and they were doing the Monday morning. They hooked me up with this guy. This guy needs a better photographer. So I said, well, look, this is all through text. I said, you don't know me, I don't know you. This thing is 2 weeks. Why don't I come out? I will shoot your NFL workouts. They were like a couple hours in the mornings. I will come out every morning. I will shoot your NFL workouts for free. And make sure you have a set of images. I still own the images, but you are allowed to use them for social media. That's, you can't resell them. I have all those things in there that you guys probably talk to your workshop attendees about. But then at the end of 2 weeks, let's sit down and talk. And I'll get to know you and how your business works. You'll get to know me, and let's see how this works. And so I shot for 2 weeks, and we sat down, we talked. I brought in a whole lot of marketing ideas for him and everything else. And we talked about budgets and kind of worked through all that. And I now have a 2-year contract with this sports performance gym. I'm working with NFL pro athletes. I'm working with college players. I'm working with high school and youth, and they do stuff across all sorts of sports. And I'm getting, through that one connection and having the forethought and the humility to say, look, I'm going to give away my time for 2 weeks in the hopes that this guy recognizes my talent and the people there like me, meaning the NFL players don't go to him after and go, man, this guy was an idiot. He's in my way all the time or whatever, because you do need to know how to work with these types of people, right? It's different. And so, that paid off, and I've got a 2-year deal with that. And that has led also to some of my high school connections to where now I have some contracts with very specific high schools to shoot their sports for the year. And so, I talk about looking in your local area, look for those youth opportunities, look for those high school opportunities, get to know a particular sport. I started with cheerleading when it comes to all the work I'm pretty much doing now. And that has ballooned into me shooting tons of stuff for pay. And try different models. Try, working out packages for parents. Maybe it's you shoot some senior portraits, have a package where I will do, a 60-minute true portrait session for the senior picture that you got to have. But I will also come to one of your kids' soccer, lacrosse, cheerleading matches, whatever it is that they do. And I will come to one of those, and you'll get some action shots of your kid as well. And now you're kind of crossing those over, right? So those opportunities exist, and you just need to start somewhere and not be afraid of that. And I mean, man, more power to you if you strike gold in the first try. But you're going to take some lumps. You're going to deal with difficult parents, difficult schools, whatever it is. You're going to face those challenges, but you just step back and go, okay, what went wrong there, and where do I have an opportunity to either fix it there or take this somewhere else?
Cool. Sounds like a lot of hustle. You put in the hustle and built yourself a really successful sports photography business. It's just awesome. Really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's but it's worth it.
Yeah. And that, anybody who missed the beginning of the show talking about that transition, I think, you took a big pay cut, but your quality of life, your passion of what you're doing, and yes, you've had to really hustle, probably work harder than you did in your 9-to-5 job, in some aspects, has paid off. That's cool.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. One quick question, I think it's kind of off topic, but I'd just like to hear your answer. You have a daughter. You probably chased her around when she was younger, trying to get some nice picture. We have Carrie in the chat. What is a good all-around lens for chasing around a 4-year-old?
If you, okay, so I will always go back to the 70-200 as depending on budgets. Okay, now I will actually say, sorry. The 70-200, when I talk about is the 2.8 with the image stabilization. They have them across all the companies have them. Mm-hmm. That is the cream of the crop, right? But that thing is usually about a $2,000 lens, depending on the builder. Some of those companies also make a 70-200 2.8 without the image stabilization, or a 70-200 f4. So look at those options as well. The other lens that's phenomenal across a lot of these builders is a 24 to 105. That 24 to 105 is a great travel lens. If your kid's really outpacing you on the field, that's going to be tough. But the 24 to 105 or those 28 to 135, those are a great lens as well. That just gives you some flexibility. I wouldn't do a prime because you're going to be too far away. You're going to be cropping a lot, and that kid's going to be moving. You need something you can zoom with. I wouldn't go too wide because then the kid's going to be this big. But either that 24-105 or that 70-200 would be a great option.
Cool. One more question I want to throw at you. When you're shooting, are you shooting RAW and JPEG or just RAW or just JPEG?
All JPEG.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
All JPEG. Because so again, remember I went top down. I had to I shot for a wire service, and time is money when you're shooting for a wire service. If that, I've had times where I know a photographer and I were the only ones that got a certain image, and we were shooting a Cal Oregon game, and we both got this phenomenal image, and he got his up faster than mine. He was from, I think, AP, and San Francisco Chronicle ended up running it on the front page. I ended up with a nice image on the inside, but he got the front one. And so I bring that up because things like, for me, speed and workflow and things like that are paramount. And I'm not, when I shoot senior portraits and everything else, I'm shooting RAW plus JPEG. But if you're talking about my sports action, it's all JPEG because I'm not getting in and doing all the fine nitty gritty stuff. And my stuff's generally not going, banner size. It's not commercial use. It's, newspapers, websites, Instagram, things like that.
Yeah. Cool. I didn't expect that answer, but it totally makes sense. Yeah.
Toby, I have a question that Jen Brosnan, she texted me because it's not allowing her to type. She said, can I get this? She just wanted to know on your white balance, are you just doing auto white balance, or are you adjusting your white balance for the situation that you're in? Especially now in light that you're shooting JPEG, on these sports situations.
Yeah, so it depends on where I'm at. If it's going to be consistent light, I will. I try not to use auto white balance as much as possible. So if I'm in a gym, like if I'm shooting a cheerleading competition or whatever, the light's pretty steady. The kids' uniform colors change sometimes, so there's, sometimes I get a little bit of variation, but I pretty much dial in. I will bring like the disc or whatever and try and, manually run my white balance, or oftentimes because of the type of lighting in the gym, one of the presets, whether it's fluorescent or whatnot, will work just fine. Dance is a tough one because things change so much. I will generally run auto white balance on things like dance because there's so much changing constantly, the types of lights you're getting and things like that. So I will manually white balance, which brings me to one thing that I wanted to mention, Toby. I talked about one hardware thing. Sony improved or brought a feature into the A9 II called the anti-flicker setting. And one of the challenges with an electronic shutter on something like a Sony or an Olympus or the mirrorless kind of cameras, when you're shooting in a fluorescent light situation, the light bulbs don't have a what's called a steady frequency. So what happens, probably if you've shot a high frame rate mirrorless camera, any of you that have done this in a gym, you'll end up seeing bars in your shots. You'll see some banding in your shots. And it's because your camera shutter is fighting with the frequency of the lighting. And so if you were to slow your shutter speed all the way down to like 1/60 or slower, which doesn't work well for action, that would go away. If you go into a mechanical shutter, like the actual physical shutter, like you have on like the Nikons and the Canons, that helps a little bit. But Sony actually introduced an anti-flicker setting in the A9 II that is specifically designed to help those scenarios. For somebody like me who shoots inside a gym with old gym lights that are fluorescent, crappy lights, a lot of them have gone to LEDs now, thank God. But those old fluorescent lights, that is a huge godsend to me.
Nice.
Wow,
Nice.
that's what that is.
Yep. Very cool. All right. Well, I think we're going to start to wrap it up. Mike, absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed this. I'd love to have you back sometime to chat more. You're clearly full of awesome information.
Anytime.
If folks who are watching, this show was brought to you by both PhotoRec TV and the Photo Enthusiast Network. Hit that thumbs up button and make sure you hit that subscribe button too, so you'll be notified of future shows. Leave a comment down below what other photographers, either a specific name or genres that you'd like to hear more about. Or, as I said, would you like to have Mike back very soon because he's full of great information? I would. You can leave those comments right down below. And I'll just mention that we're running a special to join Penn right now. There are a couple of questions we didn't quite get to. I think you're almost all Penn members. Make sure you put those in the community. We will definitely get those answered. Those are ones that I feel like Dave Alley and I can tackle quite easily, and even the community can answer. So we want to make sure you get your questions answered. David, thank you for finally bringing what was in the back of my brain to the forefront and saying, let's do this. And Allie, thank you so much as well. And Dave, talk a little bit more about what we're going to show next week, and let me share a screen.
Yeah, I am really excited. First of all, thank you, Mike, again as well. But in 2 weeks, we are going to have a friend of Allie and I. His name is Timothy Drury. He is the keyboard player right now, currently for Don Felder. He played with the Eagles. He has played with some of the biggest bands in the world, Whitesnake, and he runs this very amazing performance cube that he is inside. It's silhouetted. He's playing his performances. There he is with Whitesnake right there, and Stevie Nicks. And but this is something that is so special. And he's going to talk about not only his music, but he's going to talk about the visual representation of what he does, the filming, the stills, and how he puts it all together. And now he's actually giving back. He's doing this all over. He's going to be doing this all over the country with colleges. You can see there, this is actually at a college where he was giving a presentation and talking about his work, his photography, as well as his music. So we're going to have him here in a couple weeks, and we'll be able to do the same thing, talk about what he's doing. And he's an inspiring guy. The thing about Timothy, he's a super inspiring guy. So you're going to, even if, filmmaking is not your thing, being on and listening to him share and, some of this it's going to be great. So we're looking forward to having him in 2 weeks, same time, 6 p.m. Pacific time, May 21st.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, Mike, thank you. You can follow Mike. Information's been on the screen, but it's also linked right down below the show. Thank you so much. And chat room, thank you for joining us and sharing some questions from time to time.
Yeah, we hope to see you guys on the Photo Enthusiast Network community board. Make sure you are on there, and for sure. So, thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you, Mike.